Assemblyman Joe Patterson, you're here, sir.
Yes, I am here.
Fantastic. Well, let me properly introduce you to our group, and thank you for joining SDAC. Assemblyman Joe Patterson and his wife, Colleen, understand the challenges facing today's families as they work to raise their 4 children. That's what got propelled Joe to get involved in public service and eventually run for Rockland City Council and then for the California State Senate or State Assembly. I'm sorry, but I promoted you to a senator, although somebody's not going to find that distinction. Assembly I believe you got elected in 2022 with 60.2% of the vote. That's remarkable. He represents 5th Assembly District, which includes Placer, El Dorado counties. He was selected as vice chair of both the Housing Community Development Committee as well as Privacy and Consumer Protection. He also sits on the committees for aging and long-term care, budget subcommittee 4 on state administration, and budget subcommittee 5 on public safety, business, profession, and health. Joe's top priority is to make our community a better place to live, work, and raise a family. So without further ado, I give you Assemblyman Joe Patterson. Sir, the floor is yours.
All right, great. Well, just tell me when I should be wrapping up if we don't, if I don't do that on my own, but I appreciate the time. And I was just kind of going through the list of attendees here, and I see one person from the EDD where I used to actually work at the EDD over 20 years ago. So that was an experience, but now I'm on the budget committee that oversees the EDD budget. So it's been fun, but yeah, it's sorry for being a little late here. Some things came up on the floor. One of the things, I guess this could segue into what I'm going to talk about, but kind of give you a little insight into some things that occur here. But one of my top priorities since getting elected has been addressing the fentanyl crisis in our state. I didn't really know anything about it. I have 4 children, 10, 8, 5, and 2. And I really didn't know anything about fentanyl until one of my neighbors in 2020, December 2020, passed away from being poisoned by fentanyl. Was a high school senior, 17 years old, was working on his Eagle Scout, was involved in, really was kind of a model student. And, as a lot of kids do, was experimenting, with probably things shouldn't experiment with, but this individual took thought he was taking a Percocet and ended up being 100%, well, not 100%, but being a fake pill with fentanyl included in it, and unfortunately lost his life. And so his family has dedicated their time and really kind of even their careers to some extent educating people about fentanyl. And so I happen to be sitting on the city council in Rockland, and that's where, like I said, where they're from. And they did a presentation, and just in my role, I attended and I learned about this, and I said, hey, this is scary stuff. When I was a kid, and I think most adults these days, when they were kids, their parents had to worry maybe about marijuana or maybe ecstasy or some, nothing that I really promote a teenager using, but, alcohol, tobacco, things like that. But now you have to worry about taking a single pill and it killing you. So so I learned about that, and it kind of, scared me a lot as, father of 4. And immediately started teaching my kids actually about it. My 10-year-old and my 8-year-old are very in tune to the risks of fentanyl. And actually before Zach died in Rockland, once I started becoming very public about this and this becoming my platform, I had lost a cousin, and we knew he died from, at that time, we thought, was an overdose, and it ended up being a fentanyl that he died from. So, I've been committed to this, and then and I can talk a little bit about what I've been working on. But today, things got kind of hung up because we're working on a lot of pieces of legislation, Democrats and Republicans. And I see somebody sharing in the chat that they lost a friend. I mean, and a nephew. I'm telling you, unfortunately, it's common, and I'll get to that in a second. And it's really sad. And just as a side note, we consider it a poisoning, not an overdose. I mean, sometimes you'll hear people say overdose, and they really don't mean to say that, because with fentanyl, you're getting something that you didn't think you were getting. It'd be similar if a high school kid went out to purchase a beer or something and got somebody to get them beer, and they pick up the beer and it's actually just, they drink it and it's actually cyanide. You're not getting what you think what you're supposed to be getting. So a lot of problems around that. But today, frankly, and not to a lot of these pieces of legislation to increase penalties on people who are trafficking this drug, have to go through a particular committee in the legislature. And the chairman of that committee decided, on his own, that he wouldn't hear any bills. He had put them on hold. And this was Democrat, Republican bills. And so we decided today that we were going to try to force a floor vote on these bills, take them from committee and just put them on the floor, because the reality is it really was nonpartisan. It had nothing to do with Republicans, Democrats, but we were concerned that this one particular committee was deciding to not even hear the bills. And so we were going to force this vote on the floor. Actually, even though I'm part of the Republican caucus, 4 of the 5 bills, or 3 of the 4 bills, were Democratic bills. I mean, we really don't care. We just think it's a really important issue to address. So that kind of tied up my day a little bit, because we ended up striking a deal that the bills will get a hearing next week. And so we didn't really need to do that whole exercise. So that's really great. But there's been a lot of commotion as a result of that. So we went ahead. Is there a question, or is that a high five there? Clap. Yeah. So we were moving forward with that, and we're very happy that they're going to be hearings. I have several families in my district that have lost a child or a loved one to fentanyl. We're going to invite them to those hearings. And, there are legitimate concerns from people who oppose this legislation. I mean, it wasn't too long ago that there was a lot of prison overcrowding, and some of that was as a result of folks, using drugs, being being incarcerated. But really, the laws have changed, and it's now more about you don't go to prison really for quote unquote using drug. There are drug diversion programs. And so we think, look, if you're trafficking this into our community, you should be held accountable. Bottom line, it's a poison. So I have 4 pieces of legislation on fentanyl, and one of them would help hold people accountable. One of them would require all schools to provide notice to parents about the dangers of fentanyl. That's actually been bipartisan. It passed out of committee, no problem. Another one would actually create a parole or a probation diversion program. So right now, if you are Prop 36, you go on a drug diversion, that you can get your conviction removed. You take sort of this general class in probation, and we wanted to make one specifically for fentanyl. So that had of course, bipartisan support. And I'm very happy about the parental notification one, by the way, because that's 6 million parents every year are going to receive a notice. And if only, 1% of parents receive this, read it, then it's worth it, So the cost is very nominal. And then we have, then we have one that actually a lot of bipartisan support. It's kind of landmark legislation. Although a lot of I introduced it on day one, and several legislators joint authored with me. Democrats actually are my joint authors. Would require all schools to carry Narcan, which reverses the effects of fentanyl. And that's had no problem getting out of committee. The governor's, in fact, proposed funding it in his budget. So hopefully, those 3 of 4, I think is pretty good track record for a Republican in this super minority legislature that we have. So I'm very excited about the work we're doing, and we won't give up. We'll keep fighting that. I have a lot of legislation on various I sit on the health committee. I sit on, aging and long-term care, and I see we got a question on that. I sit on business and professions, which does all the licensing for, a lot of you folks probably already know this, but does the licensing for various agencies and realtors and barbers and so on and so forth, doctors even. And I'm on 2 budget committees, sub 4 and sub 5. Sub 4 does things like EDD, and as an example, a lot of the state agencies that are sort of catch-all come through sub 4, and sub 5 is public safety. And so that's been good. So I see a question in here that says the disability community overlaps with aging community. Can you give us any insight into hot topics? Honestly, the Aging and Long-Term Care Committee, a lot of the issues surrounding aging and long-term care actually go through the health committee. And so we've only had 1 hearing on aging and long-term care, and they were both really non-controversial bills. They passed out unanimously, and it was about a 5-minute hearing. So there's not a lot of overlap there, but there is frequently legislation. I'll tell you actually something that I'm working on that unfortunately will be held, but it's for makes sense. And I'm sorry if anybody works at this at this agency, but California has been moving to a managed healthcare approach. And so throughout California, I think one of the last steps to the transition was moving people with disabilities, particularly developmental disabilities, from into this managed care approach. If you're part of a regional center, what for some strange reason, we haven't really figured out why I am told by the Department of Managed Healthcare that this should not be happening. But people who have private pay insurance, which by the way, isn't only, it isn't, only insurance you pay yourself. It could be covered California as well, subsidized. If you have private pay insurance and we're part of a regional center, some change in the system was these doctors were telling folks, hey, we can't take your insurance anymore. And so it started with 1 or 2 people in my district, and then 3 people, and then 5 people, ended up moving to a bunch of people statewide. And we've been contacted by all sorts of people having these issues. And as you know, a lot of these doctors that are helping these kids and sometimes adults, because once you get into your regional center, you have it through, for a long time. They specialized relationship with the patient, and you can't just go on and find so it was forcing them to they had to make a choice: Medi-Cal and regional center, or private pay and lose your regional center. And that was, it was a problem for me, and problem for those people. So so I met with these families, and we introduced legislation. We just, I met with the Department of Managed Healthcare. said, it shouldn't be happening, and I really appreciated that, but it is happening. The exemption paperwork is about 40 pages. So they were giving exemptions to my constituents and to others. But it's really not right for them to fill out 40-page exemption paperwork and go through the doctors on something that shouldn't be happening. But it is happening. And so I introduced the legislation to basically just exempt these individuals from this, just totally exempt it. Because, frankly, sometimes I understand, having worked in government in the past, sometimes it takes time for things to move, and I'm sympathetic towards that. I understand bureaucracy. I have bureaucracy in the legislature. Things happen, but I just say, hey, look, we can't be keeping these individuals with disabilities in limbo any longer. I can't do it. I'm too impatient for it. So I introduced this legislation, and the health committee recently indicated to me that it's going to be a 2-year bill, i.e. I'm not even going to get a hearing on it, which was very disappointing. But I did have a conversation with the chairman, and he, I am on the health committee too. So, we have a relationship, and he promised me that he's going to advocate to try to get this done sooner than legislation would get it done. And so I think that's actually the best case scenario. We're not actually trying to exempt these individuals from what the state's trying to do. It was just kind of the only solution we could get until this is all figured out. And yeah, the bill number, I will pull up the bill number for you for sure before we get it momentarily. If it looks like I'm typing, it's because I'm looking up the bill number. but I think I was really disappointed that they wanted to make this a 2-year bill, because there's a problem happening now, and I just couldn't. If we don't get a hearing until next year, until January, February, March of next year, that means it doesn't become law until January 1st, 2025. And I just think it's way too long for these people to wait in limbo for, this to sort of get sorted out. But I do feel confident. The Department of Managed Healthcare indicated that this should not be happening, that they want to solve it. And also the chairman prioritizing, hey, we're gonna make those calls and make sure that we get this resolved sooner rather than later. So and then just one other thing that I was working on, in Rockland, I think we're very fortunate to have, well, let me give you this bill number first, actually, if you don't mind, just while I'm here. Okay, it was AB 1608. And so feel free to take a look at that. One other thing that I've been working on, we're very privileged in my community in Rockland. I think largely because of the, quality of schools that we have. We have a lot of individuals with Down syndrome. And, again, I do have a family member with Down syndrome, but we have a individual who lives in our community who's, been in Target commercials, and she's had books written about her and things like that. She's brought a lot of awareness. And so I had the privilege of authoring Down Syndrome Awareness Week resolution on the assembly floor this year. And but what I also did was gave a book to every single assembly member about this girl, because she has a book written about her, and just how you can be you. And so that was a really awesome experience on the floor. I think we had 27 families with Down syndrome. There's a legend who works in the Capitol named John, who's worked in the governor's mailroom for, he said 16 years. So we brought him onto the assembly floor. And when I was mayor of Rockland, we did a similar resolution out there too. So anyways, it's been interesting. I think just philosophically, I understand, there are a lot of needs, budgetary needs and, Medi-Cal's underfunded. I mean, we can sort of go on and on with the needs in the disability community. And but those are issues very important to me, and I'm happy to be an advocate, on various issues. We have other members in our caucus, by the way, which have children with various disabilities, and I think there are a lot of people who, if you know about the issues, just like I did with mismanaged healthcare with AB 1608. I mean, you learn about them, and you don't know, because in my family, my immediate family, we don't have these experiences. But when you learn about them, and it kind of, makes you angry, and it makes you, you want to fix them. So something I'm always willing to learn more about and see where we can solve some problems. So if there are any questions, or if you want me to talk about more, I'm now a politician, I guess, so I can talk all day long. But I'm happy to take some questions if there are any.
Thank you so much. First of all, we're happy to have you here. We should tell you that we're nonpartisan. We are essentially, the name of the entity that you came to visit is called Statewide Disability Advisory Council. And under the Government Code 19795B, each state entity must have a disability advisory committee advising the executive or the head of that entity on disability related matters. Our bottom line is we try to help improve the disability parity rate within state employment, meaning that each state entity must have, the goal is to have 16.6% of all workforce should be person with disabilities. Many of the departments are not meeting that standard, not even close. Statewide, our disability parity rate is languishing roughly about 9.3%. And there are many different tools that got implemented, including a law that just passed recently, AB 1195, which essentially helps the department to ask for a LEAP list, which is a particular type of list that they can request when they're interviewing people and hire the most qualified person that happen to be person with disabilities. And so I give you this background simply to share with you that we are in alignment with all the things that you are doing with the fentanyl bill, with the managed care issues with the regional centers and the Medi-Cal. And hopefully you'll get the department director in that entity to reduce that 40-page exemption document to 1 or 2 pages before your bill becomes fully enacted. But anyway, that's my comment. And I have somebody who has their hand up. Susan, go ahead, unmute and ask your question.
Hi, Joe. So I'm Susan Turnquist, and I'm the one from EDD.
Oh, yes.
And I'm the secretary of SDAC, along with Bobby as the co-chair. And my question is, and this is going to seem like a really basic question, but I think it's an important question to ask. As someone who is very interested in disability rights and who's on the DAC and SDAC as a state of California worker, how could I or anybody else who's here, who's state of California staff, how can we interact with the assembly to support, these particular, the bills that are being put up, or what can we do to help you all get towards what you need to do and to participate in the process? I mean, it seems like a really simple question, but it's kind of a fundamental question. We want to be a part of helping you guys do the good work down at the grassroots level. Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, I do. I think, well, first of all, some of these suggestions, so I used to be a legislative staffer as well. So I think I have, reasonable insight into what a lot of legislative offices do. But everyone, there are 120 of us, and, everybody operates a little differently. For me, and I'm only 4 months in, so maybe I'll burn out, but if we get a question or a comment about something in, specifically, if it's on a legislation, it'll sort of go in we have something called a member portfolio to go in there. So when the legislation comes up, I can see who's supporting and opposing it. But, if I get an email that's kind of specific and nuanced and not really on legislation, I actually respond to those personally. My staff will draft the responses. I mean, because honestly, we get like thousands of emails.
I'm
So
sure,
my,
yeah.
yeah, so my staff will draft the initial response, and then if I'm on like the treadmill or something, I'll edit them and add my own sort of context to those. But just two things. One is I do think it actually matters to reach out to your legislator. I mean, you may never hear from your legislator. If a lot of you are Sacramento based, it could be the same 3 or 4 people. But I think that does actually make a difference. I mean, I listen. I don't always agree. I mean, I get, there are controversial issues that I don't agree on with all day long that I get emails from. But that doesn't mean they're not important to me and that they're not going to get some kind of substantive, response from me. So it does, in my opinion, make a difference to email. The other thing is I don't know what I don't know. I mean, I think that's the biggest thing, is that when it comes to, this, I don't know anything about managed healthcare. I mean, there are all sorts of policy issues in this area. And even as a legislative staffer, there are only some that I know some better than others, and so, it took families coming to me and say, hey, Joe, this is an issue we're having. And then we sort of started investigating it, and those were constituents. But somebody has to raise these issues to people. I mean, whether it's within your official capacities or whether it's just you reaching out to your legislators, communicate with them. And I will say, for actual legislation going through, I mean, it does make a difference, especially if there's an organizational level of support for something. That does make an impact, or opposition to something that does make an impact. But it does matter. I mean, when I go vote on my legislation, I see who wrote in to oppose or support something. But also, if I were to move forward with my bill, AB 1608, obviously having all the support that I can is really helpful in that regard. So I guess the bottom line is it does help to actually communicate with the legislators. And I don't know what you do in that regard, but even if it's just on an individual basis, it does make a difference.
I love that advice. So what I'm hearing is 2 things. Number 1, write a personal email that's nuanced and is educational, but also when it comes to pay attention to the bills that are going on and write specific comments and questions about those bills to
to your assembly member,
to our assembly
yeah,
member. So you are not the Sacramento representative? Am I understanding?
I represent right outside of Sacramento. Sacramento itself, like the city or the county of Sacramento, probably has 5 or something.
Okay,
because it's so big. But I represent Placer and El Dorado counties.
Would you mind terribly putting your staff email in the chat so that those of our SDAC that are in those areas can make sure?
Yeah. So
and communicate if they have information.
Yeah. So this is sort of, I'm typing it in right now. This is sort of my public email box that my staff does. They get all these emails. So, I just sent it that was a direct message. Sorry, I'll send it to everybody.
Thank you so much. You gave a great answer. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. How do we communicate in a way that makes sense? And I think the idea of sending emails, if you're saying that those do make a difference, but being specific, being succinct, educational, and also being specific. If there's a specific bill, talk about that bill so that it's relevant to the work you're doing right now. Thank you so much for the advice.
Yeah.
This is Bobby. I want to follow up with what Susan just said. By the way, I happen to live in one of your districts that you represent.
There you go.
I'm a resident of Cameron Park.
I was just up there yesterday.
Oh, you were? Oh,
Yeah, yeah. I left this crazy place and went up to speak at a lunch for the Chambers of Commerce up there. So
that's correct. I heard that. I know one of the supervisors invite you quite often, talk about all the good work that you do. So speaking of which, so I'm communicating with my representative right now. And the issue that I want to highlight is that disability parity rate that affects all state workers statewide. And I understand that you also sit on subcommittee 4, correct? That's the governmental oversight and so forth. What kind of insight can you share with us that we can utilize in advancing this concern, both to you and the other members of the subcommittee 4? And specifically, what I'm talking about, the disability parity rate and the implementation of the bill that's already passed. I mean, we're not really passing new laws because the laws are already there. We're simply looking for implementation and enforcement of regulations that's already on the books.
yeah. Well, I think there are really two routes. One is internally within a particular agency or, maybe it's Cal HR or, not exactly sure, probably them, but, if there is an additional need or budgetary need there, the internal route is to get them to do a budget change proposal, asking for certain things, and then the second one is, again, if it's sort of individually or, maybe even as a group, at the end of each hearing, they do public comment. But I'll tell you, just my feeling about these budget subcommittees is when budget sub 5 is going on, one of the budget subs that I'm on, I have 3 other committees at the same exact time, so, I kind of bounce from the Capitol to the office building, Capitol, office building, back and forth, depending on what I need to be there to vote on. So it is not uncommon. I was in health committee on Tuesday and we did not establish a quorum until like 6 p.m. because everybody was bouncing around. So, and I mean, I get, there were a lot of just a side note, a lot of frustration from residents who showed up during that time were texting me, why isn't anybody here? Why isn't anybody here? It was because we got so many committee meetings going on at the same time, and all of them are a priority and you sort of, whatever your issue is. But anyways, I say that to say the actual budget committees themselves, it is not uncommon for the end of the hearing to only have the chairperson there. It's quite common. And so again, I think emailing the people on the committee are helpful, particularly the chair, because and you can probably find out, I don't know who it is, but whoever this budget subcommittee staff person is for that committee, for that sub, emailing them directly is obviously helpful. But internally, getting budget change proposals, if you have a specific, hey, create one position or something to, make sure this is implemented. I mean, that's basically what we vote on.
So for in this particular case, Cal HR would be the right entity that's overall in charge of, they have delegated the authority to all the departments to execute this program. So if I understand correctly, is to talk to them and offer them support by the way of BCP's budget change proposal, that they need the right resources so they can actually in meaningful way help with relieve this problem. That's what you say. And secondarily, it's not out of character or would be productive to simply write to you and share with you what the concerns are and seek your guidance in oversight capacity of these type of matters.
Yeah, I think, what's interesting is sometimes these, usually if a particular agency does a budget change proposal, that agency will come before the committee basically as an intro, they kind of talk about their agency and what they do, which is always kind of interesting because every year they do that. But it gives people an opportunity to raise certain flags with the department directors on things that it gives legislators that opportunity. And so we do that all day long. I mean, there was recently funding that the governor's proposing to be cut from CASA programs, court appointed special advocates. You know, and the people affected by that reached out, and I'm very, passionate about that as well. So I raised that issue in committee, and it was, kind of bipartisan. Nobody liked that proposal, essentially. So I think if another thing is when that agency is going to come up, you can always talk with the chair staff and say, hey, this is an issue we're really concerned about. Can you press them on this issue a little bit? Can you press the state agency? My agency isn't hiring enough people, isn't meeting their metrics. Like, can you push them on this?
Great. These are fantastic guidance and ideas. Thank you so much. Do we have any other questions for Assemblyman Joe Patterson?
I see a couple in the chat that I can answer briefly.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, there's one about, yes, the public can go to hearings. There are public hearings, and you can actually, on legislation, every single piece of legislation allows public comment, although usually it's pretty brief. And you can go to the Assembly or Senate websites to see what hearings are coming up. And most committees have set schedules, so you don't necessarily have to remember. But there are a lot of great resources and on the Assembly's website. But yes, they are open to the public 100% of the time. And that, well, except for COVID, they weren't open to the public. But and then one was just a comment. Well, I appreciate that very much.
Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate the wealth of knowledge that you shared with us. And, I will be in touch with you advocating for the issues that you brought up and concerns we raised with your office. And is there anything else that you want to share with us or want us to help you with, and other than the AB 1608, I believe you said?
Yeah, I think well, just the last thing I'll lead everybody with is that from a staffer, or especially when I worked for the state, I didn't really realize how accessible legislators were. And I also get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of meeting requests every week. And so it doesn't mean that everybody's going to get an opportunity to meet with their legislator. But if a constituent reaches out to me and says, hey, I want to meet with you on this topic, there's a 90% chance that my team, somebody from my team, will meet with that constituent. I have a policy that every time a constituent walks into my office, if I'm there, I want to meet that individual. So don't lose sight of that if you ever need to talk with your legislator about something, reach out and you probably will get a meeting with. I think I actually don't know how anybody else operates on this. I'm just saying how my office operates, but try it. Yeah. Don't hesitate to reach out. So excellent
advice. Thank you again. We had one other questions. Yeah. Okay. Well, they commented on, thank you for being so personable. We certainly enjoyed this meeting. So please come back at any time you wish to discuss any new piece of legislation that you're advancing, or you want us to know about, or simply needed support from, a group of people that will benefit from the laws that you're proposing.
Yeah, well, hey, it's been a pleasure. Honestly, when I saw this on my agenda, because my scheduler come to me and say, hey, do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? And yeah, no, whatever, but I don't know what I'm doing tomorrow or, later today even. So I was like, what are we doing? So, but this has been really great discussion, and I'm really glad I did it. And, I hope to come back in the future, and thank you very much for having me. And, don't hesitate to reach out anytime.
Well, keep up the good work that you're doing with the fentanyl bill and the other bills.
Great. Well, thank you. Take care and have a great weekend.
You do the same. Thank you.
All right. Bye.
And And that concludes our meeting for the day. And my apologies for the delay in between. But thank you again for attending. We will see you next time. Bye-bye.